Alright, so I have issued myself a code challenge here, which is to make a tic-tac-toe game, completely in the terminal, so it's not going to be using any GUIs or anything like that. But I just thought this would be a fun kind of side project to work on. It seems like it's moderately challenging enough. So I've created some criteria here that the program should be turn-based for the player and the computer. So essentially, the player makes a move, then the computer makes a move, then the player makes a move, that kind of pattern. The initial input prompt to adjust game settings. So when the game starts, there should be some kind of prompt saying, do you want to play as X or O, or what the game difficulty should be. I'm probably not going to make game difficulty in this video. I'm probably going to make follow-up adjustments to this after I'm done. I just want to get the basic game functionality created in this video. A graph of the board game that updates after every player move. So this will just be, an ASCII graph in the terminal that kind of shows the state of the game. And then some win detection system that determines the winner or if there's a tie. So as for the graph of the game, I think I want to settle with something like this. So essentially the game should start out kind of looking like this with all underscores as placeholders. And then let's say the user makes the first move in the upper right hand corner, so we can change this to an X if they're playing as X. And then the computer might go like in the middle with O. And then the game can kind of just keep going from there. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to start on is just getting the very basics set up. So first of all, I'm going to be using the print method a lot, so I'm just going to make a custom method that just shortens the print method, essentially. So I'll say public static void. I'm just going to make a method called print, and then we're just going to pass some print message, and we'll just say system.out.print message. So this way I can just call print now instead of having to type out this long phrase every single time. So that'll be useful. I think I want to start off the game by maybe just like outputting what the actual game title is. So I'll make a method called display, maybe intro message, and we'll say print, and then we'll just have we'll just say like welcome to Tic-Tac-Toe, like that. And then let's start getting the input object set up here. So I'm going to say import java.util. I'm just going to import everything for now until we start really defining some specifics here. And we'll do try scanner input equals new scanner system.in. Alright, so that's looking pretty good so far. Let's go ahead and actually, you know what? I'm going to make another method for prompting the user for some text. So I'm going to say public static string prompt, and then we're going to pass some message. And we're also going to need to pass the input object. So we'll say print message, and then we'll return the input.next line. So now this should essentially allow me to come up here, and instead of doing something like saying, system.out.print, like enter name, and then string name equals input.next line. Instead of doing this, I can now replace that by just doing string player name is equal to prompt, and then I can pass the input object and just say enter name. So we can replace these two lines with this line. I'm probably going to display my intro message before I do that, so I'll just go ahead and say display intro message. And let's go ahead and run this. So far I think everything is looking good, so we'll just run this, and we get welcome to Tic-Tac-Toe, enter player name, do that. So that's working all great. And then we're going to need another prompt to see what player piece the user is going to select, so whether it's going to be X or O. So we'll say string player, I'll just say player character is prompt input, and we'll say choose your character. And I'm pretty sure this is all the settings I actually want to have for now. I think just entering the player name and the player's character is probably good enough just for this kind of part 1 video. I'll probably add other settings like game difficulty, or maybe add like a timer in like other parts or other videos, but for this one I think we're good with just this. Alright, so now for the more difficult part of this project, we're gonna have to try and figure out how we can draw the game board using just ASCII characters, and also to update the game board with whatever move the player entered. So for example, let's say the actual human player chose the character of X and they maybe played it in this upper right hand corner, and the computer chose O and they put it here, and we'll say the player put another X here. We need to be able to kind of take these moves as raw data points and then feed them into this kind of graph template, and then figure out where they're supposed to go on this grid. And so I think the way that we're going to do that is by organizing this grid in rows and columns. So we'll have like column 1, column 2, column 3, and then like row 1, row 2, row 3. And we can do this, we can implement this in our code by using a 2D array. So let's go back to our editor here. So a 2D array is essentially just an array inside another array. And in this case, we're going to have a square 2D array, meaning that the number of rows in our 2D array is going to be equal to the number of columns. So we can create a 2D array by saying, and let's see, this should be a 2D array of probably just string values. So I'm going to say string 2D array equals, and I guess we can put in some placeholder values here. We need to call this something. I guess we'll call it game state, and probably just have underscores for now. I might change this. I don't know if these should be like null values. I don't even think they can be null values, but basically this is what our grid is going to look like in terms of user input. And then this should also be a public static. Now we just go from here, and I just looked this up. Apparently we can have null values in here, so that might actually be preferable, so that we can just later on when we're comparing to see if there's a slot that's been taken, we can just check whether or not it's null. And if it's not null, then we know that a player character has been put in that slot. So I'm just going to replace all of these underscore placeholders with null. So we just have a square 2D array of null values by default. And then I think we can just start drawing the actual board here. So this is the data that we're going to feed into our method that draws the game board. And then whatever placeholder values are in our grid should be updated in the actual rendering of our game board. So I'm going to come down here and we'll make a method called public static void, and we'll call it draw game board. Actually, I might do a double underscore just to indicate that this is a different category of method calls here. So we'll say draw game board. And we're going to need to take in the 2D array into this method. So we'll say string 2D array game state. Oops. Game state. And now, let's see. So we know that this is going to be our template game board here. So I think we can just go ahead and fill in one for one what the position in the 2D array is. So let me just hold this side by side actually with our code editor real quick. Alright, so now we can see kind of what we're going for a little bit easier now. And I think we're going to need to determine, first of all, whether or not the position is null. And if it is, we need to render some placeholder value. But if it's not, then we need to render whatever entry is in that space. So I think we just need to do a null check, which I might need to make a method for. Because, I mean, I guess I could do an inline comparison, but that might be kind of ugly. So maybe I'll make a method that's just like public static string get game slot entry, and we'll pass it. Ooh, this might be a problem. Okay, so I thought this over a little bit more, and I think what I want to do is, since we're going to be rendering the game board kind of row by row, since we're going to be printing like this line and then this line, then this line, I think it makes sense to just kind of, because originally what I was going to do was just enter each one of these entries one by one, but really we can kind of enter it row by row. And so I don't have to do an individual check manually for every single entry of a row. I can just do it in one fell swoop for an entire row. So I think in order to do that, I'm going to make a method called get, or I might call it format row entries. And this is going to take in a string array, which is the row. And we're going to go ahead and change this to a printf, since I think that will be a little bit... Actually, you know what? I may as well make a printf shorthand method up here, and we'll say we'll have our initial string. That should allow us to pass any kind of data type in here. And then I can say system.out.printf, and we'll use our template, and I'm just going to test this printf method really quick. So we'll say printf hello, and then we'll just pass in world. Okay, cool. So that works fine. Let's go back to our kind of game board drawing methods here. So we're still going to take in a 2D array, which is the game state, to fill in our entries, but we're going to go row by row. So yeah, since it looks like we can have null values in a string array, so I don't think we have to worry about having those mixed types. Essentially, the whole goal of this method is going to be to take in a row like this and then convert it to just a pure string array. And it will replace all of the null values with underscores, with like a string value of an underscore, and then whatever value that already exists will just stay the same, since that's just already a valid player move. So let's make another array, another string array, and we'll call this formatted row, and we'll just let that equal an empty array. And then we'll iterate over the row array that we've passed as an argument. So we'll say for, and I think we can just go ahead and do, actually, is there an insert method? Can I insert something into this array? I don't think there is. Okay, let's just do a numeric for loop then. That might just make it easier. So int I equals 0 for I less than row dot length, I plus plus, and then we'll just say string entry equals row at index I, and then we'll say formatted row entry is equal to null, and if that's true, use an underscore. Otherwise, it should be a string. And whatever the string is the one that we want to just maintain. So that's just a ternary operation that says if entry is null, then make it an underscore, otherwise keep it as entry. So this should take, actually, let's just test it. So I should be able to pass this row and then get a string array of all underscores. And you know what, just for the sake of testing it, let's make the last entry be x. So I should get an array back that's underscore, underscore, and then x. And we get an error. Interesting. Index 0 out of bounds for length 0.
3 hours later.
Okay, so I figured out the issue. It turns out that, not surprisingly, native arrays in Java do not work the same as native arrays in higher level languages. So essentially, I'm not able to just create an array here like this and then add new indices to it unless I specify what the size of this array should be to allocate that to memory manually. You can use an array list, so I should be able to do something like array list of strings, we'll call it formatted, equals new array list, and then just call that. And so I should be able to create this, and then I can like use the add method, which essentially is a way of inserting values into this array list. So I could say formatted.add. I don't think I'm going to do that though, because this isn't going to be an array of any dynamic size. Like, we know the defined size. It's going to be, 3. Every row has 3 entries. So I'm just going to specify that this array will have 3 entries. And I think I can do that by just saying new string array and then pass it a size of 3. So this should fix that issue that we were running into. So I'm going to get rid of this because we know the row length is right. Okay, let's try this now. So if I run this, there we go. Okay. So, in my for loop here, printing out every single entry, once we call format row entries on the first row in our game state, it replaces all of the null values with an underscore and just leaves our X entry the same. So that is fantastic. So now this should make drawing the game board much easier. I can just iterate over my game state, and then we'll want to iterate over all of the... Actually, no, we don't need to iterate over the rows. We can just say printf %s, which will be our entry, separated by a vertical bracket there. And then we can just pass... See, I wish there was a way to... Is there a way to unpack an array in Java? Can we do that? Okay, I just did some quick research, and it looks like there's no such thing as a native unpack method or a tuple in Java, so we're just going to do this the lazy way and define each of the entries in this row manually. Actually, I don't even need to make a variable for this. I don't even know why I did that. We'll just say row 0, row 1, and row 2, and here is literals. Cool. And then at the end of every single row where we have our inputs or our game state entries, we want to separate it by this dotted line. Oh, dang it. That means that I need to like keep track of the iterator again, so this might have to be another numeric for loop. So we'll just say string array row equals, and then we'll just say if I is equal to, say if I is less than game state.length minus 1. And if it is, then we'll print that dotted line barrier. I think that will give us the result that we're looking for. Okay, that's promising. Not exactly what we're looking for. I think it's because, oh yeah, printf doesn't actually create a new line, so we just have to do new line at the end of that, and I think that's it. Kind of. These should not be null. These should be... Oh, I forgot to call the formatted row entries. So we need to... Row needs to be equal to formatted row entries of game state I. And then if we run this, there we go. Okay, so we did it. We drew the game board. That's a big first step. That's awesome. And now, what's really cool about this is I can put any game move in this array here, and we should see that it corresponds directly 1-for-1 with our rendered out game board. So if I run this, now we have an O in here and an O here. So this is good. This is really good. So now we just need to ask the user for what game move they want to make, and then translate whatever they input into our game state. And I think the way that we're going to do this is probably by prompting the user, again, going back to our rows and columns kind of format. And just to make it easy for the user, I think we might want them to enter something like A1 for like column A, row 1. So instead of having our like C1, C2, I think we might want to have something like this, where we're considering it like this, and we have columns are alphabet characters and rows are numeric values. So if the user enters A1, then they're putting either like an X or an O here. If they enter a B2, right, then they're entering an X here. So we're just going to have to figure out how to parse this input which should be pretty easy. So I think the way that we're going to do this is by just using the car@at method. Since we know that the user input for their game entry is just going to be 2 characters, the first one being the column, which is A through C, and the second one being the row, which is 1 through 3. So all we have to do is just create a new prompt here, and we'll say, well, first we'll draw the empty game board just for some contrast, and then I'll say string user move equals prompt, pass the input, and we'll say enter your move, which is column by row. I guess we could do row by column. That might make it easier just for the coding logic, because the way that we index our values in the actual game state object is row first and then column second. So we'll go with row by column, and then we know that this is going to be okay. So if I'm going to do it row by column, then these are going to be switched. So then my row is going to be the alphabet characters, right? And my column is going to be, my columns are going to be the integers. So row by column, and we'll say A through C for the row, and 1 through 3 for the column. So now all we have to do to parse this is just get the row first, which is the first character. So we'll just say string row equals user move dot car@0. And the column is the second one, the second character, so user move dot car@1. And we need to convert these into integers. So the row is pretty easy because, well, the row is A through C, so we need to convert the characters A through C into 0 through 2, since 0 through 2 represents all 3 of the indices in the row. So we'll say, I think all we have to do is just do user move.car@index0. Wait, why is this red line? Cannot convert from car to string. Oh, okay, that's fine. We're gonna change that anyway. So I think all we have to do, because this is a character type, I'm pretty sure all we have to do is just say minus character A, and that will get the relative position in bytecode form, right? So like character A is like what, 97? So if we enter 97 in here, then that's 97 minus 97, which will be 0. If we enter B, which is 98, then that's 98 minus 97, which is 1. So that should give us the right 0 through 2 range. And we'll just change this to integer. And then for the column, all we have to do is convert the character into a number and then subtract 1. Since they're entering 1 through 3, and we want to convert that into 0 through 2, so we'll just say character.get numeric value, which just gives us the integer value of the character, and then subtract 1 from that. And so let's just print what we got here to make sure everything is right. So we'll print the row first, and then the column. And yeah, we'll just do that. So if all goes right, I should be able to, let me enter my username, character. If I enter C3, for example, then we should get, let's see, C is row 3, 3 is column 3, so we should get 3 and 3. Or yeah, 2 and 2 in this case, since that's going to be the actual array index. So that is great. That's working perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and make an array for, or not an array, a method for this, just so we don't have to look at that ugliness every single time. I'm going to call this public static. Let's return an int array, and it's going to be an int array of coordinates. So we'll say get grid chords, or just chord in this case, I guess. No, we'll say chords. And that's going to be based on the user inputs, or the user move. And so we do this calculation, and then we're just going to return a new int array of row and column. And so now we can just call this method up here. We can say int array grid chords get grid chords based on the user move. So now that we have the coordinates in the array that we want to change, all we have to do is manually change it. So let's make a method for doing that. Public static update game state. And we're going to pass an int array, which is going to be the coordinates that we want to change, and then the character that we're going to be adding to those coordinates. So, and this isn't going to return anything, so we'll just put a void there. And so the way this is going to work is we'll say game state, and we're going to index the row first. So chords 0, since chord 0 is the first index in chords, which is the row. And then that's going to return the row, and then we want to index the row for the column, which is chords at index 1. And now we have the actual position in our 2D array that we can change, and we're just going to change that to whatever character we pass. And that should be it. I think we can just come up here now and say, once we get the coordinates that we're updating, we can say update game state with the coordinates and the player's character, and then we can just redraw the game board. Let's do that. We don't need this printf here anymore. So if everything goes right, then what we should see is the program prompting us for our move, and then it should update the game state and then redraw the game board with the move that we entered. So if I run this, just enter my username. I'm going to go with X again. So if I enter, let's say C2, that's row C, column 2, so we should see an X right here at the bottom middle of our game board. Yes, okay, cool. So that works perfectly. That's great. That's a huge step. So now all we have to do is come up with the game logic for actually detecting whether or not we have 3 in a row or a tie.